Hi, friends. Um, Happy Good Friday to those of you who celebrate that. I don't, but I do. I do tend to. I just find it interesting to sort of at this time of year kind of reminds me the whole thing of like that you can't kill an idea by killing a person. That's always my takeaway from Easter. Uh, Even though yeah. Hi, Jules. Hi, Jessica. So I was actually just watching Jesus Christ Superstar with a couple friends. The 70s version with the disco Jesus. Shout out to Adnan if you joined us. If you said you were gonna come. Yeah, it was my friend Danny's first time ever seeing it, and yeah, they were suitably. It's hilarious. It's very good, but also hilarious if you haven't seen it. The 1970s, oh so 70s, oh so 70s. Yeah. Um. So yeah. I just kind of have a little bit of a little bit of disco on the brain, which is not particularly compatible with Pride and Prejudice. But you know what? Why not? So, I'm going to start here with chapter 53. So, Mr. Wickham was perfectly satisfied with this conversation, that he never again distressed himself or provoked his dear sister Elizabeth by introducing the subject of it, and she was pleased to find that she had said enough to keep him quiet. The day of his and Lydia's departure soon came, and Mrs. Bennet was forced to submit to a separation, which, as her husband had by no means entered into her scheme of their all going to Newcastle, was likely to continue at least a twelvemonth. "Oh, my dear Lydia," she cried, "when shall we meet again?" "Oh, Lord, I don't know. Not these 2 or 3 years, perhaps. Write often. Write to me very often, my dear." "As often as I can. But married women have never so much time for writing. My sisters may write to me. They will have nothing else to do." Mr. Wickham's adieus were much more affectionate than his wife's. He smiled, looked handsome, and said many pretty things. He's as fine a fellow," said Mr. Bennet, as soon as they were out of the house, "as ever I saw. He simpers and smirks and makes love to us all. I am prodigiously proud of him. I defy even Sir William Lucas himself to produce a more valuable son-in-law." The loss of her daughter made Mrs. Bennet very dull for several days. "I often think," said she, "that there is nothing so bad as parting with one's friends. One seems so forlorn without them." "It is no such thing. This is the consequence, you see, madam, of marrying a daughter," said Elizabeth. "It must make you better satisfied that your other 4 are single." "It is no such thing. Lydia does not leave me because she is married, but only because her husband's regiment happens to be so far off. If that had been nearer, she would not have gone so soon." But the spiritless condition which this event threw her into was shortly relieved, and her mind opened again to the agitation of hope by an article of news which then began to circulation. The housekeeper at Netherfield had received orders to prepare for the arrival of her master, who was coming down in a day or two to shoot there for several weeks. Mrs. Bennet was quite in the fidgets. She looked at Jane and smiled and shook her head by turns. "Well, well, so Mr. Bingley is coming down, sister," for Mrs. Phillips first brought her the news. "Well, so much the better. Not that I care about it, though. He is nothing to us, and I am sure I never want to see him again. But, however, he is very welcome to come to Netherfield if he likes it. And who knows what may happen? But there is nothing to us. Sister, we agreed long ago never to mention a word about it." "And so is it quite certain he's coming?" "You may depend on it," replied the other, "for Mrs. Nichols was in Meryton last night. I saw her passing by, and went on purpose myself to know the truth of it, and she told me that it was certainly true. He comes down on Thursday at the latest, very likely on Wednesday. She was going to the butcher's, she told me, on purpose to order some meat on Wednesday, and she had got 3 couple of ducks just fit to be killed." Miss Bennet had not been able to hear of his coming without changing colour. It was many months since she had mentioned his name to Elizabeth, but as soon as they were alone together, she said, "I saw you look at me the other day, Lizzie, when my aunt told us of their present report. And I know I appeared distressed, but don't imagine it was from any silly cause. I was only confused for the moment, because I felt that I should be looked at. I do assure you that the news does not affect me either with pleasure or with pain. I am glad of one thing, that he comes alone, because we shall see less of him. Not that I am afraid of myself, but I dread other people's remarks." Elizabeth did not know what to make of it. Had she not seen him in Derbyshire, she might have supposed him capable of coming there with no other view than what was acknowledged. But she still thought him partial to Jane, and she wavered as to the greater probability of his coming there with his friend's permission, or being bold enough to come without it. Yet it is hard, she sometimes thought, that this poor man cannot come to a house which he has legally hired without raising all this speculation. I will leave him to himself. In spite of what her sister declared and really believed to be her feelings in the expectation of his arrival, Elizabeth could easily perceive that her spirits were affected by it. They were more disturbed, more unequal than she had often seen them. The subject which had been so warmly canvassed between their parents about a 12-month ago was now brought forward again. "As soon as ever Mr. Bingley comes, my dear," said Mrs. Bennet, "you will wait on him, of course." No, you forced me into visiting him last year, and promised if I went to see him he should marry one of my daughters. But it ended in nothing, and I will not be sent on a fool's errand again." His wife represented to him how absolutely necessary any attention would be from all the neighbouring gentlemen on his returning to Netherfield. "'Tis an etiquette I despise," said he. "If he wants our society, let him seek it. He knows where I live. I will not spend my hours in running after my neighbours every time they go away and come back again." "Well, all I know is that it will be abominably rude if you do not wait on him. But, however, you shan't prevent my asking him to dine here. I am determined. We must have Mrs. Long and the Goldings soon. That will make 13 with ourselves, and so there will be just room at the table for him." Consoled by this resolution, she was better able to bear her husband's incivility, though it was very mortifying to know that her neighbours might see Mr. Bingley in consequence of it before they did. As the day of his arrival drew near, I begin to be sorry that he comes at all," said Jane to her sister. "It would be nothing if I could see him with perfect indifference, but I can hardly bear to hear it thus perpetually talked of. My mother means well, but she does not know. No one can know how much I suffer from what she says. Happy shall I be when his stay at Netherfield is over." "I wish I could say anything to comfort you," replied Elizabeth, "but it is wholly out of my power. You must feel it, and the usual satisfaction of preaching patience to a sufferer is denied to me, because you always have so much." Mr. Bingley arrived. Mrs. Bennet, through the assistance of servants, contrived to have the earliest tidings of that the period of anxiety and fretfulness on her side might be as long as it could possibly be. She counted the days that must intervene before their invitation could be sent, hopeless of seeing him before. But on the 3rd morning after his arrival in Hertfordshire, she saw him from her dressing-room window enter the paddock and ride towards the house. Her daughters were eagerly called to partake of her joy. Jane resolutely kept her place at the table, but Elizabeth, to satisfy her mother, went to the window. She saw Mr. Darcy with him, and sat down again by her sister. "There is a gentleman with him, mamma," said Kitty. "Who can it be?" "Oh, some acquaintance or other, my dear. I'm sure I do not know." "La!" replied Kitty. "It looks like that man that used to be with him before. Mr. what's his name? The tall, proud one." "Good gracious! Mr. Darcy! And so it does, I vow. Well, any friend of Bingley's will always be welcome here, to be sure. But else I must say that I hate the sight of him." She looked at Elizabeth with surprise and concern. She knew but little of their meeting in Derbyshire, or Jane looked at Elizabeth with surprise and concern. She knew but little of their meeting in Derbyshire, and therefore felt for the awkwardness which must attend her sister in seeing him almost for the first time after receiving his explanatory letter. Both sisters were uncomfortable enough. Each felt for the other, and of course for themselves, and their mother talked on, of her dislike of Mr. Darcy, and her resolution to be civil to him only as Mr. Bingley's friend, without being heard by either of them. But Elizabeth had the source of uneasiness which could not be suspected by Jane, to whom she had never yet had courage to show Mrs. Gardiner's letter, or relate her own change of sentiment towards him. To Jane, he could only be a man whose proposal she had refused, and whose merit she had undervalued. But to her own more extensive information, he was the person to whom the whole family were indebted for the first of benefits, and whom she regarded herself with an interest, if not quite so tender, at least as reasonable and just as what Jane felt for Bingley. Her astonishment at his coming to Netherfield, to Longbourn, and voluntarily seeking her again, was almost equal to what she had known on first witnessing his altered behaviour in Derbyshire. The colour which had been driven from her face returned for half a minute with an additional glow, and a smile of delight added lustre to her eyes, as she thought for the space of time that his affections and wishes must still be unshaken. But she would not be secure. "Let me first see how he behaves," said she. It will then be early enough for expectation." She sat intently at work, striving to be composed, and without daring to lift up her eyes, till anxious curiosity carried them to the face of her sister, as the servant was approaching the door. Jane looked a little paler than usual, but more sedate than Elizabeth had expected. On the gentleman's appearing, her colour increased, yet she received them with tolerable ease, and with a propriety of behaviour equally free from any symptom of resentment or any unnecessary complacency. Elizabeth said as little as to either as civility would allow, and sat down again to her work with an eagerness which it did not often command. She had ventured only one glance at Darcy. He looked serious as usual, and she thought more as he had been used to look in Hertfordshire than she had seen him in Pemberley. But perhaps he could not, in her mother's presence, be what he was before her uncle and aunt. It was painful, but not an improbable conjecture. Bingley she had likewise seen for an instant, and in that short period saw him looking both pleased and embarrassed. He was received by Mrs. Bennet with a degree of civility which made her two daughters ashamed, especially when contrasted with the cold and ceremonious politeness of her curtsy and address to his friend. Elizabeth particularly, who knew that her mother owed to the latter the preservation of her favourite daughter from irredeemable infamy, was hurt and distressed to a most painful degree by a distinction so ill applied. Darcy, after inquiring how Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner did, a question which she could not answer without confusion, said scarcely anything. He was not seated by her, perhaps. Perhaps that was the reason of his silence, but it had not been so in Derbyshire. There he had talked to her friends, when he could not to herself, but now several minutes elapsed, without bringing the sound of his voice, and when occasionally unable to resist the impulse of curiosity, she raised her eyes to his face, she as often found him looking at Jane as herself, and frequently on no object but the ground. More thoughtfulness and less anxiety to please than when they last met were plainly expressed. She was disappointed and angry with herself for being so. "Could I expect it to be otherwise?" she said. "Yet why did he come?" She was in no humour for conversation with anyone but himself, and to him she could hardly have the courage to speak. She inquired after his sister, but could do no more. It is a long time, Mr. Bingley, since you went away," said Mrs. Bennet. He readily agreed to it. "I did begin to be afraid you would not come back again. People did say you meant to quit the place entirely at Michaelmas. But, however, I hope that is not true. A great many changes have happened in the neighbourhood since you went away. Miss Lucas is married and settled, and one of my own daughters. I suppose you heard of it. Indeed, you must have seen it in the papers. It was in the Times and the Courier. I know, though, it was not put in as it ought to be. It was only said, lately George Wickham, Esquire, to Miss Lydia Bennet, without there being a syllable outside of her father, or the place where she lived, or anything. It was my brother Gardiner's drawing up, too, and I wonder how he came to make such an awkward business of it. Did you see it?" Bingley replied that he did, and made his congratulations. Elizabeth dared not lift up her eyes. How Darcy looked, therefore, she could not tell. "It was a delightful thing, to be sure, to have a daughter well married," continued her mother. "But at the same time, Mr. Bingley, it is very hard to have her taken such away from me. They have gone to Newcastle, a place quite northward, it seems, and there they are to stay. I do not know for how long. His regiment is there, but for I suppose you have heard of his leaving the Shire and being gone into the regulars. Thank heavens he has some friends, though perhaps not as many as he deserves." Elizabeth, who knew this to be levelled at Mr. Darcy, was in such a misery of shame that she could hardly keep her seat. It drew from her, however, the exertion of speaking, which nothing else had so effectively done before. She asked Bingley whether he meant to make any stay in the country at present. A few weeks, he believed. "Well, when you have killed all your own birds, Mr. Bingley," said her mother, "I beg you to come and shoot as many as you please on Mr. Bingley's manor. I am sure he will be vastly happy to oblige you, and will save all of the best coveys for you." Elizabeth's misery increased at such an unnecessary, such officious attention. Were the same fair prospect to arise at present, as had flattered them a year ago, everything, she was persuaded, would be hastened to the same vexatious conclusion. At that instant she felt that years of happiness could not make Jane or herself amends for moments of such a painful confusion. "The first wish of my heart," she said to herself, "is never more to be in company with either of them. Their society can afford no pleasure that will not atone for the wretchedness of this. Let me never see either one of the other again." Yet the misery, for which years of happiness were to offer no compensation, received soon afterwards material relief from the observation of how much the beauty of her sister rekindled the admiration of her former lover. When first he came in, he had spoken to her but little, but every 5 minutes seemed to be giving her more of his attention. He found her as handsome as she had been last year, as good-natured and as unaffected, though not quite so chatty. Jane was anxious that no difference should be perceived in her at all, and was really persuaded that she had talked as much as ever, but her mind was so busily engaged that she did not always know when she was silent. When the gentlemen arose to go away, Mrs. Bennet was mindful of her intended civility, and they were invited and engaged to dine at Longbourn in a few days. "You are quite a visit in my debt, Mr. Bingley," she added, "for when you went to town last winter, you promised to take a family dinner with us as soon as you returned. I have not forgotten, you see, and I assure you, I was very much disappointed that you did not come back and keep your engagement." Bingley looked a little silly at this reflection, and said something of his concern at having been prevented by business. They then went away. Mrs. Bennet had been strongly inclined to ask them to stay to dine there and that day, but though she had always kept a very good table, she did not think anything less than 2 courses could be good enough for a man on whom she had such anxious designs, or satisfy the appetite and pride of one who had 10,000 a year. Yes, Mrs. Bennet. Chapter 54. As soon as they were gone, Elizabeth walked out to recover her spirits, or, in other words, to dwell without interruption on those subjects that must deaden them more. Mr. Darcy's behaviour astonished and vexed her. "Why, if he only came to be silent, grave, and indifferent," said she, "did he come at all? She could settle on it no other way than gave her pleasure. In no way that gave her pleasure. He could still be amiable, still pleasing to my uncle and aunt when he was in town, and why not me? If he fears me, why come hither? If he no longer cares for me, why silent? Teasing man, teasing. I will think no more of him." "Sure, Jan." Her resolution was for a short time involuntarily kept by the approach of her sister, who joined her with a cheerful look, which showed her better satisfied with her visitors than Elizabeth. "Now," said she, "that our first meeting is over, I feel perfectly easy. I know my own strength, and I shall never be embarrassed again by his coming. I am glad he dines here on Tuesday. It will be publicly seen that on both sides we meet only as common and indifferent acquaintances." "Very indifferent indeed," said Elizabeth laughingly. "Oh, Jane, take care." "My dear Lizzie, you cannot think me so weak as to be in danger now." "I think you are in very great danger of making him as much in love with you as ever." They did not see the gentleman again till Tuesday, and Mrs. Bennet in the meantime was giving way to all the happy schemes which the good humour and common politeness of Bingley in half an hour's visit had revived. On Tuesday they were a large party assembled at Longbourn, and the two who were most anxiously expected, to the credit of their punctuality as sportsmen, were in good time. When they repaired to the dining-room, Elizabeth eagerly watched to see whether Bingley would take the place which, in all their former parties, had belonged to him by her sister. Her prudent mother, occupied by the same idea, forbade to invite him to sit by herself. On entering the room, he seemed to hesitate, but Jane happened to look round, and happened to smile. It was decided. He placed himself by her. Elizabeth was with a triumphant sensation, looked towards his friend. He bore it with noble indifference, and she would have imagined that Bingley had received his sanction to be happy, had she not seen his eyes likewise turn towards Mr. Darcy with an expression of half-laughing alarm. His behaviour to her sister was such during dinner-time as showed her an admiration of her which, though more guarded than formerly, persuaded Elizabeth that if left wholly to himself, Jane's happiness and his own would be speedily secured. Though she dared not depend upon the consequence, she yet received pleasure from observing his behaviour. It gave her all the animation that her spirits could boast, for she was in no cheerful humour. Mr. Darcy was almost as far from her as the table could divide them. He was on the side of her mother. She knew how little that such a situation would give pleasure to either, or make either appear to advantage. She was not near enough to hear any of their discourse, but she could see how seldom they spoke to each other, how formal and cold was their manner whenever they did. Her mother's ungraciousness made the sense of what they owed him more painful to Elizabeth's mind, and she would, at times, have given anything to be privileged to tell him that his kindness was neither unknown nor unfelt by the whole of the family. She was in hopes that the evening would afford some opportunity of bringing them together, but the whole of the visit would not pass away without enabling them to enter into something more of conversation than the mere ceremonious salutations attending his entrance. Anxious and uneasy, the period which passed in the drawing-room before the gentleman came was wearisome and dull to a degree that almost made her uncivil. She looked forward to their entrance as to the point on which her chances of pleasure for the evening must depend. "If he does not come to me, then," she said, "I shall give him up forever." The gentleman came, and she thought he looked as if he would have answered her hopes. But alas, the ladies had crowded round the table where Miss Bennet was making tea, and Elizabeth pouring out the coffee, in so close a confederacy that there was not a single vacancy near her, which would admit of a chair. And the gentleman approaching, one of the girls moved closer to her than ever, and in a whisper said, "The men shan't come and part us. I am determined. We want none of them, do we?" Darcy had walked away to another part of the room. She followed him with her eyes, and envied anyone who spoke to him, had scarcely the patience enough to help anybody to coffee, and then was enraged against herself for being so silly. A man who had once been refused, how could I ever be foolish enough to expect a renewal of his love? Is there one among the sex who would not protest against such a weakness as a second proposal to the same woman? There is no indignity so abhorrent to their feeling. She was a little revived, however, by bringing back his coffee-cup himself, and she seized the opportunity of saying, "Is your sister at Pemberley still?" "Yes, she will remain there till Christmas." "Quite alone? Have all her friends left?" "Mrs. Ainsley is with her. The others have gone on to Scarborough these 3 weeks." She could think of nothing more to say, but if he wished to converse with her, he might have had better success. He stood by her, however, for some minutes in silence, and at last, on the young lady's whispering to Elizabeth again, he walked away. When the tea-things were removed and the card-tables placed, the ladies all rose, and Elizabeth was then hoping to be soon joined by him, when all her views were overthrown by seeing him fall victim to her mother's rapacity for whist players, and in a few minutes after seated with the rest of the party. She now lost every expectation of pleasure. They were all confined for the evening at different tables, and she had nothing to hope but that his eyes were so often turned towards her side of the room as to make him play as unsuccessfully as herself. Mrs. Bennet had designed to keep the two Netherfield gentlemen to supper, but their carriage was unluckily ordered before any of the others, and she had no opportunity of delaying them. "Well, girls," she said as soon as they were left to themselves, "what do you say to the day? I think everything has passed off uncommonly well, I assure you. The dinner was as well dressed as any I ever saw. The venison was roasted to a turn, and everybody said that they had never saw so fat a haunch. The soup was 50 times better than what I had had at the Lucas's last week. And even Mr. Darcy acknowledged that the partridges were remarkably well done. And I suppose he has 2 or 3 French cooks at least. But, my dear Jane, I never saw you look in greater beauty. Mrs. Long said too, for I asked whether you did not. And what do you think she said besides? Alas, Mrs. Bennet, we shall have her at Netherfield at last. She did indeed. I do think Mrs. Long is as good a creature as ever lived, and her nieces are very pretty behaved girls, and not all handsome. I like them prodigiously." Mrs. Bennet, in short, was in great spirits. She had seen enough of Bingley's behaviour to Jane to be convinced that she would get him at last, and her expectation of advantage to her family when in a happy humour was so far beyond reason that she was quite disappointed at not seeing him there again the next day to make his proposals. "It has been a very agreeable day," said Miss Bennet. "It has been a very agreeable day." Oh, am I back? Okay. "Lizzie, you must not do so. You must not suspect me. It mortifies me. I assure you that I have now learned to enjoy his conversation as an agreeable and sensible young man, without having a wish beyond it. I am perfectly satisfied with what his manners now are, and that he has never had any design of engaging my affection. It is only that he is blessed with a greater sweetness of address and a stronger desire of generally pleasing than any other man." "You are very cruel," said her sister. "You will not let me smile, and are provoking me to it every minute." "How hard is it in such cases to be believed?" "How impossible in others." But why should you wish to persuade me that I feel more than I acknowledge?" "That is a question which I hardly know how to answer. We all love to instruct, though we can teach only what is not worth knowing. Forgive me, and if you persist in indifference, do not make me your confidant." Yeah, sorry, my OBS crashed for a minute there, but it came back. So, last chapter of the day. A few days after this visit, Mr. Bingley called again, and alone. His friend had left him that morning for London, but he was to return home in 10 days' time. He sat with them above an hour, and was in remarkably good spirits. Mrs. Bennet invited him to dine with them, but with many expressions of concern, he confessed that he had engaged himself elsewhere. "Next time you call," said she, I will hope we will be more lucky. He should have been particularly happy at any time, etc., etc., and if she would give him leave, would it take an early opportunity of inviting them. "Can you come tomorrow?" Yes, he had no engagement at all for tomorrow, and her invitation was accepted with alacrity. He came, and in such good time that the ladies were none of them dressed. In ran Mrs. Bennet to her daughter's room in her dressing gown, with her hair half finished, crying out, "My dear Jane, make haste, and hurry down. He is come. Mr. Bingley is come. He is indeed. Make haste, make haste. Here, Sarah, come to Miss Bennet this minute, and help her with her gown. Never mind Miss Lizzie's hair." "We will be down as soon as we can," said Jane, "but I dare say Kitty is forwarder than either of us, for she was upstairs half an hour." "Oh, hang Kitty! What has she to do with it? Come, quick, be quick. Where is your sash, my dear?" But with her mother gone, Jane would not be prevailed on to go down without one of her sisters. The same anxiety to get them by themselves was visible again in the evening. After tea, Mr. Bennet retired to his library, as was his custom, and Mary went upstairs to her instrument. Two obstacles of the five being thus removed, Mrs. Bennet sat looking and winking at Elizabeth and Catherine for a considerable time, without making any impression on them. Elizabeth would not observe her, and when at last Kitty did, she very innocently said, "What's the matter, mamma? Why do you keep winking at me? What am I to do?" "Nothing, child. I do not wink at you," she said as she sat only 5 minutes longer. But unable to waste such a precious occasion, she suddenly got up and saying to Kitty, "Kitty, come here, my love. I want to speak with you." It took her out of the room. Jane instantly gave a look at Elizabeth, which spoke of her distress at such premeditation, and her entreaty that she would not give into it. In a few minutes, Mrs. Bennet half opened the door and called out, "Lizzie, my dear, I want to speak with you." Elizabeth was forced to go. "We may as well leave them by themselves, you know," said her mother as soon as she was in the hall. "Kitty and I are going upstairs to sit in my dressing room." Elizabeth made no attempt to reason with her mother, but remained quiet in the hall till she and Kitty were out of sight, and then returned into the drawing room. Mrs. Bennet's schemes for the day were ineffectual. Mr. Bingley was everything that was charming except the professed lover of her daughter. His ease and cheerfulness rendered him most agreeable addition to the evening party, and he bore with the ill-judged officiousness of their mother, and heard all her silly remarks with forbearance and command of countenance, particularly grateful to the daughter. He scarcely needed an invitation to stay to supper before he went away. An engagement was formed, chiefly through his own and Mrs. Bennet's means, for his coming the next morning to shoot with her husband. After this day, Jane said no more of her indifference. Not a word passed between the sisters concerning Bingley, but Elizabeth went to bed in the happy belief that all must speedily be concluded, unless Mr. Darcy returned within the stated time. Seriously, however, she felt tolerably persuaded that this must have taken place with that gentleman's concurrence. Bingley was punctual to his appointment, and he and Mr. Bennet spent the morning together as had been agreed on. The latter was more agreeable than his companions expected. There was nothing of presumption or folly in Mr. Bingley that could provoke his ridicule or disgust him into silence, and he was more communicative and less eccentric than the other had ever seen him. Bingley, of course, returned with him to dinner, and in the evening Mrs. Bennet's invitation was again at work to get everybody away from him and her daughter. Elizabeth, who had a letter to write, went into the breakfast room for that purpose soon after tea, for as the others were all to go sit down to cards, she could not be wanted to counteract her mother's schemes. But on returning to the drawing room, when the letter was finished, she saw, to her infinite surprise, there was reason to fear that her mother had been too ingenious for her. On opening the door, she perceived her sister and Bingley standing together over the hearth, as if engaged in earnest conversation. And had this led to no suspicion, the faces of both, as they were hastily turned away and moved away from each other, would have told it all. Their situation was awkward enough, but hers, she thought, was still worse. Not a syllable was uttered by either, and Elizabeth was on the point of going away again, when Mr. Bingley, who as well as the other had sat down, suddenly rose and whispered a few words to her sister, and ran out the room. Jane could have no reserves from Elizabeth, whose confidence would give pleasure, and instantly embracing her, acknowledged with the liveliest emotion that she was the happiest creature in the world. "It's too much," she added, "far too much. I do not deserve it. Oh, why is not everybody as happy?" Elizabeth's congratulations were given with a sincerity and a warmth, a delight which words could poorly express. Every sentence of kindness was a fresh source of happiness to Jane, but she would not allow herself to stay with her sister or say half that remained to be said for the present. "I must go instantly to my mother," she cried. "I would not on any account trifle with her affectionate solicitude, or allow her to hear it from anyone but myself. He is gone to my father already. Oh, Lizzie, to know what I have to relate will give such happiness to all my dear family. How shall I bear such happiness?" She then hastened away to her mother, who had purposely broken up the card party and was sitting upstairs with Kitty. Elizabeth was left by herself, now smiled at the rapidity and ease with which an affair finally settled, that had given them so many previous months of suspense and vexation. "And this," she said, "is the end of all his friends' anxious circumspection, of all his sister's falsehood and contrivance, the happiest, wisest, and most reasonable end." In a few minutes she was joined by Bingley, whose conference with her father had been short and to the purpose. "Where's your sister?" he said hastily as he opened the door. "With my mother upstairs. She will be down in a moment, I dare say." He then shut the door, and coming to her, claimed the good wishes and affection of a sister. Elizabeth honestly and heartily expressed her delight at the prospect of their relationship. She shook his hands with great cordiality, and then till her sister came down, she had to listen to all he had to say of his own happiness and of Jane's perfections, and in spite of his being a lover, Elizabeth really believed all his expectations of felicity to be rationally founded, because they had for the basis the excellent understanding and super-excellent disposition of Jane, and a general similarity of feeling and taste between her and himself. It was an evening of no common delight to them. The satisfaction of Miss Bennet's mind gave a glow of such sweet animation to her face, and made her look handsomer than ever. Kitty simpered and smiled, and hoped her turn was coming soon. Mrs. Bennet could not give her consent or speak her approbation in terms warm enough to satisfy her feelings, though she talked to Bingley of nothing else for half an hour, and when Mr. Bennet joined them at supper, his voice and manner plainly showed how really happy he was. Not a word, however, passed his lips in allusion to it till their visitor took his leave for the night, but soon as he was gone, he turned to his daughter and said, "Jane, I congratulate you. You will be a very happy woman." Jane went to him instantly, kissed him, and thanked him for his goodness. "You are a good girl, and I have great pleasure in thinking you will be happily settled. I have no doubt of your doing well together. Your tempers are by no means unlike. You are each of you so complying that nothing will ever be resolved on, so easy that every servant will cheat you, and so generous that you always exceed your income." "Exceed! I hope not. Imprudence and thoughtfulness in money matters would be unpardonable to me." "Exceed their income! My dear Mr. Bennet," cried his wife, "what are you talking of? Why, he has 4,000 or 5,000 a year." "And very likely more." Then addressing her daughter, "Oh, my dear Jane, I am so happy. I am sure I shan't get a wink of sleep all night. I knew how it would be. I always said it must be so at last. I was sure you could not be so beautiful for nothing. I remember as soon as I ever saw him when he first came into Hertfordshire last year, I thought how likely it was that you should come together. Oh, he is the handsomest young man ever seen." Wickham, Lydia, and all were all forgotten. Jane was beyond competition her favourite child. At that moment she cared for no other. Her younger sisters soon began to make interest with her for objects of happiness, which she might in future be able to dispense. Mary petitioned for the use of the library at Netherfield, and Kitty begged very hard for a few balls there every winter. Bingley, from this time, was of course a daily visitor at Longbourn, coming frequently before breakfast and always remaining till after supper, unless when some barbarous neighbour who could not be enough detested gave him an invitation to dinner which he thought himself obliged to accept. Elizabeth had now but little time for conversation with her sister, for while he was present, Jane had no attention to bestow on anyone else, but she found herself considerably useful to both of them in those hours of separation that must occur. In the absence of Jane, he had always attached himself to Elizabeth for the pleasure of talking to her, and when Bingley was gone, Jane constantly sought the same means of relief. "He has made me so happy," she said one evening, "by telling me that he was totally ignorant of my being in town last spring. I had not believed it possible." "I suspected as much," replied Elizabeth, "but how did he account for it?" "It must have been his sister's doing. They were certainly no friends of his acquaintance with me, which I cannot wonder at, since he might have chosen so much more agreeably in many respects. But when they see, as I trust they will, that their brother is happy with me, they will learn to be contented, and we shall be on good terms again, though we can never be what we once were to each other." "That is a most unforgiving speech," said Elizabeth, "that I have ever heard you utter. Good girl, it would vex me indeed to see you ever again the dupe of Miss Bingley's pretended regard." Would you believe it, Lizzie, that when he went to town last November, he really loved me, and nothing but persuasion of my being indifferent would have prevented him from coming down again. He made a little mistake, to be sure, but it is to his credit of his modesty. This naturally induced a pharyngenic from Jane on his diffidence and how little value he put on his own good qualities. Elizabeth was pleased to find that he had not betrayed the interference of his friend, for though Jane had the most generous and forgiving heart in the world, she knew it was a circumstance which must prejudice her against him. "I am certainly the most fortunate creature that ever existed," cried Jane. "Oh, Lizzie, why am I thus singled out from my family and blessed above them all? If I could but see you as happy, and if there were such another man for you. If you were to give me 40 such men, I could never be so happy as you. Till I have your disposition, your gentleness, your goodness, I can never have your happiness. No, let me shift for myself, and perhaps, if I have very good luck, I may meet with another Mr. Collins." The situation of affairs in the Longbourn family could not be long a secret. Mrs. Bennet was privileged to whisper it to Mrs. Phillips, and she ventured, without any permission, to do the same by all her neighbours in Meryton. The Bennets were speedily pronounced to be the luckiest family in the world. Only a few weeks before, when Lydia had first run away, they had been generally proved to be marked out for misfortune. Well, that is it for today. We will pick it up on Monday, and probably finish on Tuesday, actually, at this rate. So happy for Jane. She deserves all the happiness in the world. She is such a lovely character, and as is Bingley. They're very sweet together. And yes. Yeah. So, yes, not another Mr. Collins. Yeah, it's one of the best lines. If I'm very lucky, I'll meet with another Mr. Collins. We will, I believe, hear once more from him before we are done, and of course we have another visitor who's going to the shades of Pemberley. So yes, we have more fun stuff to go, but yes, we have a happy ending for Jane for now. So, all of you take care. Have a lovely Easter. I will be back on Monday, and we will, this has been really fun. So, yeah. Okay, I'm going now. Bye-bye.